Okay, this is a spool set. It has 22 10 meters of copper. The number 2 has 28 gauge, 10 meters of copper. Number 3 has 22 gauge, 20 meters of copper. Number 3 has 28 gauge, 20 meters of copper. And number 5 is a copper nickel, which is more resistive, and it's 10 meters. And we're going to do what we did with capacitors with resistors. In resistors, as we increase the length of the spool, the resistance should go up because of the geometric factor. As we decrease the gauge number, the area will go up. As the area goes up, the resistance goes down. So what we want to do is set up the multimeter to measure these spools as we go through this. So again, we go over, and we want to measure any internal resistance here. Note to self, make sure you don't bury everything under there. And because you have long leads, there'll be some internal resistance, like 0.1, 0.2. And in the case of the spools, that could be significant. So you want to make sure that you take a look, make sure it's correct. Okay, so if I come over here now and I touch spool 1, which is 10 meters, all right, I get 0.9, which is much greater than 0.2 or 0.3, so I'm measuring something. So let's say that's by subtraction about 0.6. Now if I go over here to the 22 gauge number 3, I should double my number, so I hold firmly down. And I'm reading 1.4. 1.4 minus 0.3 is 1.1. That's approximately double my previous number. So I doubled the length, I doubled the resistance. Now if I want to measure .30 meters of spool, I need to put 2 in parallel with a very small wire with low resistance in it, like so. So I put this spool in parallel with this blue wire, so spool 2 will not count. So if I put one end on the far end of number 1 and the other on the far end of number 3, I should be reading the resistance there. It didn't want to work, so do I have things in contact? Should have. Don't tell me the battery's gone. Okay, I was reading on this thing when I had good contact about 2.4. 2.4 minus 0.3 is roughly going to be 2.1, which is roughly 3 times as much. So I would go through this cycle throughout. I would also do it in series and in parallel. How do I do series? To do series, I'd simply need to connect this spool 4 to one end This is the most resistive of all the spools except number 5. And number 5 comes over here to the other side. And I am reading 23.2, if you can see that. So that's the 2 most resistive spools in series. If I want to measure number 5 by itself, I read roughly 18.8. If I measure number 4 by itself, I'm reading 5.2. Now, suppose I want to measure this in parallel. Well, let me put it back over spool 5, and I'm reading when it makes its final adjustment, because it takes some time, because there's actually internal current running here. I get 18.8. Now, I put one wire on the other side of spool 4, and then I clip to the other side of spool 5, putting them effectively in parallel. And if you're looking at the multimeter, you can see it rapidly drop down to where I am reading 4.4. Now, we can do all the measurements with the multimeter, but in the 19th century they didn't have a multimeter. In the 20th century they had the analog version of that, and actually you can find them in a Goodwill store. The expensive one still works, except you got to read the dial. So, how do we set up a Wheatstone bridge? That's going to be our next tape.